The FX3 is probably one of the gold standard cinema cameras these days, not only because of its low light performance and because it was used in a blockbuster movie, but because of its customizability with the design of the body itself. So in this video, I'm just going to go over three main setups that I have for my FX3 that you may find useful if you're looking at rigging up either your FX30 or your FX3 yourself. Now the first setup is going to utilize the cage-free design of this camera and just kind of keep it very bare bones. The second setup is my go-to. It uses the small rig cage, but it still has that flexibility of adding some accessories and kind of really customizing it and dialing it down to your personal shooting style. And then the third setup is the wildest one, utilizing the cine back and going into a full-blown rig that just can shoot for literally all day without losing power. Now, before I dive into these setups, all of the accessories that I'm using will be included in the description down below. The majority of these items are from Small Rig, but you can go with other brands. I personally just like this style of Small Rig, and everyone knows Small Rig and they just have an incredible reliability with their products. So let's dive on into the setup number one, which I like to call the minimalist. Now, setup number one, I call the minimalist, pretty much because it doesn't use a cage and it just uses a NATO rail on the top of the camera. And that gives us the ability to add a monitor to the FX3, which I think is very important and probably the most important thing to add to any cinema camera, especially if you're filming out in daylight, because when you're comparing the brightness of a camera screen to the brightness of most external monitors, the monitors are always going to win, and you can get shades for them as well. And it's just going to be a lot bigger picture to see exactly what's going on in your frame and your composition, and to make sure that you're correctly exposed. So this setup just utilizes a NATO rail that goes into the 1/4-20 mounting holes on top of the FX3. My choice of NATO rail is Small Rig, which comes with the Small Rig cage for the FX3. You can obviously buy it separately as well. And then my monitor of choice is the Hollyland Mars M1 Enhanced. This monitor is absolutely fantastic. And then mounted to the bottom of the monitor is just a monitor mount arm, whatever you want to call it. This one is actually from Newer. I got this because I needed it in a pinch, and it has the 3/8 mounting hole on the bottom, which conveniently goes into the 3/8 mounting hole on top of the NATO rail. That pretty much completes my minimalist cage-free setup for the FX3. Obviously, we are missing our HDMI cable. My HDMI cable of choice is the Condor Blue, right-angled cable, because it just kind of keeps things a little bit tidier, which I really like. And it adds that little bit extra flair with that lightning blue color accent. And that's it. This I used for a while, but the main reason why I don't use it is because the grip is just a little lacking on the FX3 for my hands. My pinky kind of feels like it's hanging by a thread, and I just don't really like it, to be honest. So the reason why I put the NATO rail on instead of just using a cold shoe mount for the monitor and then putting it in the hot shoe of the camera, one is I don't really trust putting heavy things in that hot shoe mount without them being bolted down, like with the XLR handle that comes with the FX3. And secondly, it allows us to use a top handle. This is the Small Rig rotatable top handle with a really nice wooden accent. This just goes onto the top of that NATO rail, clamps down, and conveniently, I already have the Small Rig cold shoe monitor mount on top of the top handle. So this takes that minimalist setup one step further and gives you that top handle option if you wish, and you want that little extra point of stability when you're filming. And the great thing about this Small Rig top handle, I'll just take it off the camera real quick. So you just twist this little bit at the top, and it allows you to change the angle of the handle itself. And then if we just take a little closer look at this Small Rig handle, I really like this one because it has two cold shoe mounts, one right here and one at this end. And then it also has a 3/8 mount, depending on what kind of monitor mount you wish to use on this handle. Another alternative of mounting this is to have the handle facing the same direction as the lens. And I find this balances a lot better, particularly if you have a longer lens, like with a filter on as well. It just counters that weight a lot nicer. And especially when I add the cage on for setup number two, this is going to be the go-to way of mounting it. So with setup number one, there's going to be a lot of similarities going into setup number two. Obviously, we're just going to be adding the cage, which gives us a little bit more flexibility. But setup number two is how I have my FX3 rigged up 100% of the time. So setup number 2, or as I like to call it, the jack of all trades, utilizes this cage from Small Rig. This is a one-piece cage. Obviously it comes with that NATO rail if you purchase it. And it's great because it bolts into the bottom of the camera, and then it has 2 quarter 20s, one on each side. So it just adds 3 points of kind of security on the FX3. Now I've used a few cages over the last couple of years on both the FX30 and the FX3, and I definitely think the Small Rig is the best kind of form-fitting one without any kind of frills and unnecessary features. So at the bottom of the cage, we have an Arca Swiss kind of tripod mounting section all the way along here. So it can just slide into a tripod head without having to add an additional tripod plate on the bottom of the camera. On the left-hand side of the camera, we have a very small NATO rail, which adds a lot of functionality for mounting a handle. We have a cold shoe mount on the corner if you want to add a microphone, or you can mount your monitor there. It just gives a lot of customizability. And then on the right-hand side on the grip, so it adds a bit more grip to it, a little bit chunkier. And then it has a few more mounting holes as well, along with the lever to open the battery door, which is very important so it doesn't get stuck or in the way. So right off the bat, the reason why I use this is obviously because it adds that extra grip and it allows me to fully grasp the FX3 and just be a little bit more stable without my hand fatiguing because my pinky's falling off the bottom. But basically this is going to be the same setup as setup number 1 with a few differences. So because of that cold shoe mount on the cage, it allows me the option to add a microphone. This is the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus, and it just gives me that flexibility if I want to get audio whilst I'm filming. And then with that NATO rail on the left-hand side, I can attach a handle if I wish to, which just obviously adds a little bit more stability when filming. I can bring it real close to the body. I can hold the top handle if I wish as well, just to add different points of contact to keep my footage as steady as possible. And it's super easy to break down. I just twist off the top handle, twist off the left handle if I have that on, and then it's just back to pretty much the bare bones FX3. The cage is really unnoticeable, and like I said, that extra depth to the grip just makes a world of difference for long periods of filming. So I absolutely love having the cage on my FX3, and as I mentioned, this is how I have it set up 100% of the time. The grip is fantastic, but the biggest thing is that it just allows me full control and flexibility on how I wish to set up the camera. And the nice thing is on the left-hand side of the cage, there is this lip that protrudes. This keeps everything away from all of the outlets on the left-hand side of the FX3 and allows you to still fully articulate your screen if you want to use that as reference in conjunction with a monitor. But the reason why I like that it sticks out is because it's kind of a pseudo grip. So if I want to get really close to the body and have extra stability, I already have that second point of contact on the cage itself without having to add a handle, which I personally don't like doing. So this is it. Without a battery, this is what the Cineback looks like on the FX3. Now it breaks down really nicely and really quickly. If I just wanted to store it in my camera bag, I'll just take off my lens, obviously put the lens cap on, and then it just goes in like this. It really doesn't take up too much space. It just slots in perfectly and it can pack down really nicely. So obviously we're going to need some power. Now my choice of power for this is the Small Rig VB99 Pro Mini V-mount battery. This thing is absolutely fantastic. It has an LCD display, so it can show me there we go, it shows me how much power I have left. And this actually doubles up as a power bank for me whilst I'm traveling. So then it also shows me what my power usage is when I have devices plugged into it. But obviously its main purpose is a V-mount battery, and just powering the FX3 and my Hollyland monitor, this thing can go all day. The next piece I add on is this tiny NATO rail from Small Rig. There are other options, but this is all I had. Now this just goes on top of the Cineback in one of the 3/8 mounting points. And then I just tighten this down real good. And this allows me to mount my Small Rig top handle. So I'll just slide that on real quick. So here is the final overkill setup of the FX3 with the Cineback. Now, a little bit of breakdown with the Cineback itself. So it's made up of some Small Rig cheese plates and a 3D printed back with DTAP power with the V-mount back on there as well. And then on the other side, it has a really nice section that's padded for your monitor to, like the camera's screen itself, to kind of be tucked away nicely if you don't wish to have that out. And then with the DTAP options, obviously we have power going to the camera with a Condor Blue dummy battery, and then power going to the monitor with a Condor Blue DC in clamp down cable, which is really nice. So in fact, to make this rig truly complete, I have to take off that battery, and that's it. We're ready to go. And this thing, like, I can lock it in really close to my body, and it's just incredibly stable whilst filming. So this is actually amazing. But personally, for my filming style, I don't use this all too much because there are some drawbacks with this setup. So drawback number one is obviously it's kind of tough to get inside to all of the buttons. So if I want to switch between my frame rates, I have to kind of jam my finger in there and then just hope I'm hitting the button. It's kind of a little bit annoying. It's not the end of the world, but it's just one thing that just bothers me. But the biggest thing and the biggest drawback, and to the reason why I don't use this all that often, is because we have to use a dummy battery, which leaves our battery door open and exposed. So obviously kind of breaches the weather sealing of this camera. I film a lot in the Utah desert. There's a lot of dust and debris, and I really don't want that getting into the internals of the camera itself. So there are other options. You can use a DTAP to USB-C and just go into the USB-C option on the camera, which will just charge the battery, which is a good alternative. But one of the great things about the Cineback is that if you leave your camera switched on, there is just a switch right here, which is kind of a master power switch. So you just press that and it will power everything up that's been plugged into the DTAP with just one switch. So if you're using the USB-C charging instead of a dummy battery, you're going to have to power on the camera every single time, which isn't the end of the world because I have to do it with the HoloLens monitor anyway. But obviously it means you're going to have to be jamming your finger into that very tight space between the camera and the Cineback itself. Probably would be alleviated if I had my monitor cable coming from the other side, but I just wanted to keep my cables kind of together and keep them a little bit tidy rather than having them come out. But the bottom line is, this is an excellent option, and I haven't tested out enough to kind of give a true experience. There are a ton of videos out there on the Cineback, far better than what I could ever put out, so I definitely recommend checking those out if this is something that interests you. But it's just something really fun that just kind of really opens up the potential of the FX3, and just a great option to explore if you want to fully rig it out. Hopefully this video has been helpful and maybe answered a few questions that you may have had with your process on rigging up either your FX30 or FX3. If you have any questions about any of the setups that I've included in this video, or maybe any suggestions of something that I can do to improve my own setup, always happy to hear that. DMs are open. Obviously, feel free to drop a comment down below as well. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, I'll see you later.